The red light come on? Or the red thing at the bottom? I can see it from here, and then,
This one?
yeah,
Yep.
that means you're on.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Okay, good evening. We'll call the Finance Committee meeting for Thursday, August 11th, 2022 to order. We are recording this meeting. We are in the small conference room in Town Hall. It's kind of hard to get the camera to see everybody. We do have, I'll tell you who's here in a minute. Let's just do that. Mark Kelleher is here. Mark Amarez is here. Angelo Lamontia is here. Dana DeCosta is here. And Peter Hughes, the chair, is here. So we have 5 members present. We have a quorum. If anyone is recording anything out here during this meeting, please let me know. And we are available on GoToMeeting, and we'll have the town administrator actually calling in here shortly. Any public comments and announcements? Hearing none, we'll move on. The minutes of July 21st, 2022, I prefer we hold for our next meeting because there are only 4 of us here who are at the meeting. I'd rather wait until we get 5, which would be a quorum for the board. So if you don't mind. Yes, Mr. DeCosta.
If you did get copy of the draft minutes, if are there any errors or omissions, please just get them back to me and I'll go back and see if I can include them.
Okay, so everybody okay with holding those till next month? And Dana, put it on your list so that we make sure we do that, okay?
That's that.
As I said, Joe Powers, the town administrator, will be calling in via GoMeeting fairly soon to go through his items. One of the items this evening is our new finance director, Anne Marie Ellis, was to be here tonight to be introduced to us and have a discussion with us about things related to finance. She notified Joe this afternoon she had a family situation she had to deal with, and we'll look forward to seeing her at a later date. Okay, so, and the topics under town administrator are going to hold until town administrator comes in. So let's go then to item 4, which is the open meeting law training. How many people went to the training session we had at the community center? Anybody?
I was not able to go that day.
Okay, it was well attended. I went to the, was it 3 o'clock or whatever the afternoon session was. I think there were 45 or 50 people there. It was a good session. The handouts were very small and tiny, and when you're trying to read the headers and whatnot, they were so dark. It was a little difficult, but the presenter from Coleman and Page did a good job, walked us through the topics, etc. And it's a good reminder for everybody just to go through that training. Things are different now with open meeting laws, so we all just need to be careful. So just take that one under advisement. And by the way, the materials are available and be posted. If they aren't now, they will be on the website, so that you can go and visit that at any point in time. The video, I believe, is supposed to be on the website.
It is.
Okay, so you can go look at it. If you haven't already, you can take a look at it. Number 5 is an educational moment. One of the topics I asked Dana to lead was the whole topic of free cash. I'll point out that Lou is with us tonight, sitting in the back. You probably can't see him. Nope. He has brought up the topic of free cash before this board, and I think before the selectmen as well, Lou, if I remember correctly. We asked Dana to take a deep dive on it and give us a little educational moment on free cash. Mr. DeCosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give you, I did send out a handout with the agenda. That was just one of the better documents I found. I'll just tell you that there are tons of, if you just put in your search engine, Massachusetts or MA free cash, you come back with just loads of documents, a couple of videos, all kinds of ways you can gather information. So rather than rehash a bunch of that, I thought I would talk about free cash, sort of the history and where we are and where we're going in the town of Harwich, because I think that makes the most sense to us. Most common phrase here on free cash, it isn't free and it isn't cash, and nobody likes that statement, but it's true. Free cash to me is more the leftovers of things. Back in the 1990s, when Mr. Hughes and I were both selectmen, the town was going through a real growth period at the time. Our population had doubled and was in the process of doubling again. Since then, nothing's happened, but, you know, we went 20 years with the same population of 12 to 13,000 people. But back then, we went from basically a 6,000 person population to the 12,000. And departments had to grow. A lot of things had to happen that we were struggling with as policymakers. But we had a very old and formal free cash policy at the time. And we didn't have a director of finance, as we're going to meet next month. We had what was then known as the financial gurus. It was the town accountant and the treasurer and the deputy assessor and a couple of assessors and a couple of old selectmen and a couple of finance committee members who came up with the policies that we'd follow. And back then, we raised $4 million worth of free cash, over $4 million worth of free cash on an annual basis. And per capita, we were #1 in the state for free cash. And I thought, well, there's got to be something wrong there. Why would Little Harwich be #1? And even against just total numbers, the town of Harwich was number 20 out of 351 towns. We were right up there with Boston and some of the richer towns, Lexington, Newton, Concord was probably the highest. Our problem was we needed $2 million to support the operating budget. Having free cash in your operating budget is never, ever a good idea. And if we adopted a policy, that should be sentence number 1. We also benefited back then from
Excuse me, Dan, you might
Yep.
just explain why you think that's the case. I know why I think it's the
Right,
case.
right, and I do have that, that's all coming
Okay,
up
all right.
a little bit later. I'll get into what causes all this and why we did it back then, I think. And then be free for questions. So we also benefited from about a little over $2 million on the cherry sheet. And if you got Mr. Hughes's cherry sheet information for this year, we're at a negative number. I mean, we don't get any money from the state, really, when it comes to the cherry sheet. But we used to get over $2 million back then. Well, a couple of things happened. I remember going, and it was when we were both in office, I remember going to the financial gurus and saying that we got to get free cash out of the budget. And they said, well, cut your budget by $2 million. And back then, the budget was $20 million, so that was a big, significant cut to take. And we were trying to grow the budget to meet the demands of a higher population and needing a new fire station and needing this and needing that. So it was not a situation we could do. I even asked to meet them halfway. They were doing mostly through receipts. I said, fix that by $1 million and we'll meet you halfway. We'll find $1 million. And that didn't even get us anywhere. So it's a policy that we carried through the mid-2000s, early 2000s, and it all came to roost. It all went south on us. We lost our free cash, ability to generate free cash. We lost the $2 million from the state. They changed formulas and we were left out. And all of a sudden, the selectmen of 2005 presented the town for the FY 2006 budget with the largest permanent override the town had ever seen. And luckily, voters voted that down, and it didn't pass. And a watered-down version of that, which was still the largest override we ever faced, passed. So it was still a large health increase for the taxpayers to get us out of the mess. And the only good thing that came out of that whole mess was we got free cash out of the budget. there was no more free cash in the budget. Today, we have a director of finance. We have a lot of people that are just much more financially intuitive working on it. We have better reserves now than we did back then. We're taking care of the OPEB numbers. We're just doing all the right things. We've increased our bond rating from AA to AAA. So we're just a much better position, and we're handling our free cash better. I guess the only problem I still have today is that we talk about how to spend our free cash far more than any kind of policy on how we create our free cash and why we create our free cash. So I think that's an important discussion that the Finance Committee needs to have, and I think that was some of the topics that Lou brought up in the Selectmen's meeting right after town meeting this year. As I said, free cash is more or less leftovers. There are three kind of big buckets and three more smaller ones that contribute to free cash. The leftovers from previous year's free cash is one of the big buckets. So whatever you had left over from this town meeting automatically becomes free cash for the next town meeting. The leftovers from budgets not being spent. So if we give a department $100,000 and they spend 80, that 20,000, if there's no other deficits in other budgets, becomes free cash. And then the big one, excess receipts. So if we project actual receipts for the golf course, for example, of $1 million, and they come up with receipts for $1.2 million, well, that 0.2 becomes free cash if all the receipts are within a certain line. There are some smaller areas like interest on certain accounts and excess overlay, returned articles, different areas that can show up in terms of free cash, but the big ones are those three. And I'll just touch on those three as to how I think we got in trouble before. In the past, when it comes to the leftover free cash, they used to, the financial gurus used to tell us we had to save $1 million. And they used to tell us it was for an emergency. But if you think about that, town meeting is in the first week of May, and it would often spill into the second week of May back then. We had long town meetings back then.
Excuse me, Dave, 1 second. Do we have to log him in or something?
I don't believe so. Joe, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, there he is. Okay, you're there. All right.
Hi, Joe.
Test, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we hear you.
You're here. You're here.
Loud and clear.
Beautiful. And thank you for your patience and sorry for the delay.
Okay, so let me just, for the audience out there, the town administrator, Joe Powers, has just joined us on
I got about
video
30
here
seconds more.
by GoToMeeting. So, Joe, we have started the meeting, do some housekeeping up front. Dana was talking about free cash, and he's going to finish that up, and then we'll go back to your segment, okay?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, and you can hear us all right?
Perfectly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of leftover free cash, they used to ask us to hold $1 million for emergencies. Turns out to use that $1 million, as we're finding out right now, with a special town meeting, you have to have 40 days to advertise that special town meeting. And the free cash disappears June 30th. So 10 days before beginning of June, you have to have your emergency and call a town meeting to be able to appropriate the money. And it has to be an emergency that needs $1 million and doesn't have any other way to come up with it, like insurance money or declaration from the state in some big national emergency or whatever. So the big emergency holding never held any weight with us, and we regularly spent it down below the $1 million. But there should be a number that we agree upon that gets carried over into next year's free cash, just as a way we want to go forward. Or we put it in a place where we can use it, like the surplus money. The department's not spending all of their budget. It is just my kind of personal feeling that the reward for not spending all of your budget should not be that the Finance Committee next recommends you cut your budget. The reward should be that you still maintain that and you still work to turn your back every year, and that you get an attaboy or a good job for doing that. That's something that we should encourage rather than discourage by trying to cut people's budgets. And then the third big area, excess receipts. One of the real problems we can run into is when we keep receipts low, which we can't go over. You can't go over the amount, you can only be under. But if you keep it too far under, that means that you might not be supporting the operation of what you're doing. If you tell golf that they have to raise $1 million, and they're generally raising 1.2, but it takes them 1.1 to raise that $1 million, you can mess yourself up in a kind of a situation that just gets away from you. And all of those things got away from the town in the early 2000s, presenting us with that big override in the FY 2006 budget. It all got away from everybody in terms of what was presented. And I don't think anybody wants to go through that again. So I think that over the year, whether we adopt something or not, at least the Finance Committee should spend some time devoted to talking about what we think a good free cash policy should be for Harwich, and how we think it should be left in terms of what we do with the money. So that's my topic on free cash, and I'd be glad to answer questions as you get them.
So Dana, just for folks that might be viewing in that aren't that familiar with town government, whose money is free cash? Who owns it?
Well, it's theirs, and if you think of its leftovers, it's money that we asked a lot of people to appropriate and then didn't end up using in the case of budgets, or in the case of projections, those kinds of things. So it's the taxpayers' money. They have to appropriate at town meeting. It does have to be certified by the state before you can spend it. But ultimately, we should be the driving force in making good decisions and recommendations to the town meeting as to what gets done with it.
And you mentioned during your presentation about a goal or objective to get free cash out of the budget. Could you explain your rationale for that?
Yeah, just, you don't want one-time revenue, and free cash by any definition that the Department of Revenue gives or anybody else gives on free cash is that it's really a one-time revenue. You should use it for one-time expenses larger than budgetary expenses, like we use it a lot for articles, to buy larger pieces of equipment, to do things with OPEB, to put some in our savings. Those are good uses of free cash, but to support an operating budget becomes a problem if it, one, gets too high, and two, it dries up, because there are certain things that happen in the state in terms of what they do for formulas and in terms of what our financial situation does, that just creates situations where free cash can dry up. And sometimes it's nobody's fault, it just is a situation that it dried up. And if you're relying on that money, now you're cutting that money because you don't have it, so.
Yeah, there are ups and downs associated with free cash. There's nothing certain from year to year. So I think it's the uncertainty of it that leads you to say, hey, that should be for something extra, not necessarily a budgeted or operating budget item. Angela, do you have a question?
I don't have a question, I have a suggestion.
Okay.
I think it's important that you write a document that becomes, what we're going to be doing with it, and send it to the selectmen and everyone else, and get it down on paper, as you suggested before. Because I think everybody who is working in this building should know what exactly we should be doing. And
Yeah,
just put that down. And the other thing I think should happen is, I don't think it's a good idea to raise a future cost on a plot, and you're only doing it because you're trying to build some free cash. and that's crazy. That's where the problems are occurring recently. All of a sudden, there's a ton of money over there. So I think it's just a good document.
So what you're talking about is coming up with a recommended policy.
Well, I
basically.
mean, he's almost gone through it.
No, I understand, no, I understand that, I understand that, but what would you title it? Would it be FinCom recommendation on,
Yeah.
on free cash
Cer-
policy, for
certainly,
instance, you know?
For driving the budget, it would be a policy that the selectmen would have to
They'd have to-
also concur with and adopt and say is good sound sense. And then we'd have to have, as a town, reasons that we would deviate from it. But as long as we've got a nice framework that we all agree on and the town administrator can work with and so on and so forth, I think having at least the same kind of thing supposed to happen every year, that makes it a lot easier to make it happen. And taking the roller coaster out of free cash is a noble goal, I think.
Mark Keller,
Dan, you said very little money from Cherry Street, Cherry Sheet. I looked at the figures that Peter said. It says we're getting like $794,000 this year, is that right? You said we're getting very little, and the figure you sent to me,
Well, no, the assessments have to come out of that, so the total charges, you're correct, 794,468 is the total we have. The total charges against it is 825,310.
those are state or county
the
charges?
negative.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
The state giveth and the state taketh away, you know?
What do they take away? What charges do they take away from?
Well, our county assessment comes out of, I mean, the formula's here. I'll be glad to meet with you offline and
And then
go
you
over
said
that.
June 30th, free cash disappears.
Yes.
So,
Or you start over again.
You start over with a new formula. Free cash is there, and then it gets rolled into the next year. Anything you did not
So
spend.
it rolls into next
You're
year.
dealing with
Yeah.
fiscal years.
So if you start with $3 million, you spend $2 million, and you have $1 million left, you start the next year with at least that $1 million, minus other things that can go on. I mean, if your collections on taxes didn't meet enough, then that would come out of any free cash you had. Certain charges come out of it before you can get your hand on it, but that's how they set up what they certify for you.
DOR certifies your free cash at the end of June. When does that figure come out?
I don't know what it is today, it's probably, what, late summer? Oh, I don't
Joe,
know.
when does free cash get certified, roughly? I know it,
So we strive for submittal to Division of Local Services usually before the end of August. I say usually because, as you can imagine, this year with our new finance director, sorry, I promised Anne Marie I would not call her new finance director. The finance director who is new to Harwich. She's been with us just under a month. She's closing out the books, but we're striving to get that in as soon as possible because we want to know that number. Just as you've been saying, Dana, as we do our planning, we want to know what that number is as we get into the tax rate session, in November and all that, just to have all of our ducks in a row. And I know Anne Marie, and Mr. Chairman, if I could just say it now and when
Sure.
we get back to the agenda item.
yeah.
Anne Marie Ellis was going to join me in person this evening, but she had an unforeseen matter take her away. So I know that the chairman and I will work on finance director and I coming back. So you can first formally meet her, and certainly she can do better with these questions than I. But so we strive for an August submission. We usually get notice back then in early fall, and so we're hoping for perhaps an early fall submission with a mid-fall notification from Division of Local Services.
Okay, so if everybody agrees, and Joe, I hope you agree, Dana, why don't you bring back something a little bit more meat on the bones, as we might call a policy recommendation just a recommendation on free cash usage? Just something
Yeah.
a little bit more definitive, we can share with the selectmen, share with the town administrator, share with the financial team to see if there's some common ground we have there, or some understanding we have there.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Like I said, I wanted to just present tonight so that everybody knew kind of what we have and where we are.
Right.
Do you have a key to lock up?
Yes.
You did? Okay. So we're just finished, then no one,
Okay, no, I locked the door.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, all right. Well, you have to, Joe, you gotta come back so we can lock the door. No, I'm just teasing. I'm only teasing.
So I don't mind putting together a draft of a draft.
Okay, great. So Dana, take that action item.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Lou, did you have any comment or question, or?
The only thing that comes to mind.
It might be helpful if you just walk up here. There's a mic here. It's kind of hard, I think,
All
for,
right. Can I sit?
yeah, sure, sure.
The only question I would have, is there any historical data on free cash? So we know that real estate assessments over, under. So over the last 5 years, what's been the up and down? What's projected? Is there any kind of information so that it just doesn't become a policy statement, so that there's facts behind it that say, look, this is how it's been going. We expect 20 new houses being built in Harwich. Why? Because the permits have been pulled, the construction has started. Their average price is going to be, we know that we're going to make $200,000 above our plan in new taxes for housing, or different budgets. But we need, I think, some factual information that drives that says, here's how it comes. Here's how we make our decisions, at least from my perspective.
So the first part of that, which should be fairly straightforward, is, let's just say you go back 5 years and say, what was the amount of free cash certified each year? That's something easy to come
Yeah,
up with,
yeah.
right? That's well known. It's probably in our,
Yeah, the amount we start with and the amount we end up with is historical data that we could put together. I've seen a spreadsheet with 20 years on it before, so yes.
But the real driving thing is, how is it created, how does it come about?
Yep.
well, I think also that if you look at how it's been used or spent over the last 5 years, it might, as you're doing this policy thing, a recommendation, might give us some insight as to,
Right.
oh, this is what we've been paying for. Just a snapshot to put in front of people. That's a,
And-
I like that idea.
And I'm sure, as the town administrator would tell you, all the numbers look pretty good until you get to the COVID years, and then some big ups and downs happen that just have an asterisk, and there's no other way to go around it. And I think in most cases, we've done the right things with those, and you know, we always used to put, as a pretty ongoing kind of thing, half of the leftover into our savings account, stabilization fund, and half of it into the OPEB, which is another reserve for us. And that's just a good place to put it. I used to get nervous when the OPEB half would get bigger than the other half, because you can't respend that. At least the stabilization fund you can respend, but yeah, I can put
The
together.
focus first, how does it create it?
Yeah,
How does it grow? How is it there?
Yeah.
And then the second half, which is, and this is a major project, is how is it best spent? And who should make those determinations? That's the
Yeah,
second.
and you have to start somewhere by collecting the data,
Right,
so.
exactly. Okay,
Good.
that's-
Angela, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think that it's important that when you're doing your article, is to look at, should we do each department? Should we include each department? That's so we know that, you know, the harbor master gets 50,000 free cash usually, this one's free cash, and I think it's helpful, because you would know the total free cash, then you would know it by account.
And that might be Rev 2, you know, if
Yeah.
we do an initial burst at it as to just total numbers, and then we can refine it, and once we see what it looks like, so.
my own personal view on that one is that if you have a really good set of department heads that are working together to try and not spend their entire budget and things like that, it becomes a cultural thing for the town, and that's a good culture to be in, when you've got a good core of strong department heads that come in annually with part of their budget unspent, and they're happy to do it, and they feel proud of what they've done, and got all their work done with less money. That's a culture we want to encourage and have. I used to get frustrated by the schools back when they were part of the town, when they'd come back and say, we spent everything but $1. And one year was $1 they had left over, and they said, well, that's just good budgeting. And then you go see
Good
the stacks
spending.
of paper that they found in
It's good spending.
June that they bought in order to help them for the next year and stuff like that, you know.
You're in buying of
Right.
supplies.
And they were part of the town then,
Yep.
and could have contributed to how much free cash we had the next year, but they spent it, baby. But that was
Okay, so-
the exception.
You have the action.
Yep.
Look forward whenever you're ready to come back.
Yep.
Okay, we'll do that, all right? So let's go back up to the second item on the agenda, which is the town administrator, who again is on the screen with us this evening. Thank you, Joe, for attending. The item we wanted to have Anne Marie talk to us about, other than the introduction, was to bring us with an updated debt schedule, we talked before you left to go home to be on the screen, that you don't have that with you, and she will have that at some later date, right? So,
Correct. The hope that Anne Marie had is, when she met with you folks, it was to get some questions that she had answered to make sure that she was on the right path.
right.
If I could first, Mr. Chairman, to step
Yep.
back for a moment and say thank you. Again, thank you for letting me do this from my spacious kitchen table, which if you could see on the other side, you'd see the mess. But I don't know if my teenagers are happy that I'm home now, but I'm happy that I'm home and doing the meeting, so thank you for that.
Well, and we're with them, so, if they want to come look at the screen, they can see all of us if they want to, so.
They might have questions.
Careful what you wish for, but I understand the directive.
If you need an enforcer, let us know, we can do that,
I appreciate that as well.
No problem.
And before I go too far afield, I just wanted to, if I could, just make one point about the discussion you were just having.
Sure.
And I heard, Lou's comments and questions.
Yep.
I want to put out there that as you were talking, I went on the internet, I went into mass.gov, and certainly Anne Marie Ellis, as our finance director, has this information. I have some reports from years past that I'd be more than happy to share, but I also want to offer that mass.gov, the state's website, does a phenomenal job through the Department of Revenue, their Division of Local Services. So if anybody were interested, if you simply go on mass.gov and search on the phrase data bank, it brings you right up to a portal where you can find any financial trend for any community in the Commonwealth. They call it Data 351, but you can drill down on data specific to Harwich, and I couldn't do justice to explain how much information is out there, but to Lou's point, and I couldn't agree more, as we go forward for fiscal year 24 planning, we all need to do so in an informed manner. And there's no better way to be informed and make informed decision making than to rely upon consistent data that's collected, and I would say generally a source that can be trusted, because all of the information that DLS is using coming from the town anyway. And so anybody that's ever curious, I would recommend they go to mass.gov/databank, and you can really dive into the data. Again, though, Mr. Chairman, to you and your committee, as you go through the process as well, Anne Marie and I, and certainly I know the Board of Selectmen stand ready to provide whatever information you're looking for.
Sure.
But
So
as
Joe,
a
let me just,
person, I love that website.
okay, let me just ask you a question. To your knowledge, if we went and looked at Harwich today, probably Mark's doing it now, I don't know him. He's distracted.
He's smiling.
He's our tech weenie here, if you will. Thank you, Mark, by the way, we appreciate that. Is it the end of the fiscal year we just finished, or is it a year behind as far as data goes, do you know?
So, yeah, they're typically the previous year, fiscal year. So right now, when I looked up, all of their data files cover fiscal year 22.
Okay,
So knowing that we're still in the first quarter of fiscal year 23, there are some reports where they'll do a mid-year report, if you will.
yeah,
But you can definitely rely upon, now that we're in August, that you'll see full data for fiscal year 22. And generally, if memory serves correct, most of their data files go as far back as 20 years. So you certainly can get a good breadth and depth of information.
okay. All right, so while we're talking about information and that type of thing, we have kicked around a little bit. Not immediately, but as we get ready and think about getting into the budget process, which we basically start here around the first of the year, right? I mean, you guys are doing your thing in the fall and everything else. I think with enough lead time, there's certain documents or certain things we'd like to see as a committee to make sure we're prepared to get into that process. One would be the debt schedule. One would be OPED, where we stand on that, maybe a historic look and, what the outlook for the future is on that kind of thing. Dana, you had a few others. I think old articles maybe, things that we all might scratch our heads and say, hey, this article's been out there for 4 years, nobody's done anything, can we grab that money and, put it to work? Let's put it that way. What else did you have on your list, Dana?
I was just putting together a list of things that I've always relied upon in the past, the capital outlay plan, the current one plus the proposed one, a vehicle list for all municipal vehicles, the debt schedule, the operating budget, and the format I like the most is the current year with the proposed year and then 2 actual years behind that you can look at a 4-year kind of rolling thing. And then the next layer underneath the budget, in other words, we get the 1-pager that the budget can fit on if you do it right. But
Yeah, that's right.
underneath all those salary and wages are actual people, and there's actual training money, and there's actual overtime and things like that. Seeing all of the numbers that make up the salary and wages by department is something we just need to go through, and some of us here take the time to actually go through it. The same with expenses and the same with capital, which is not the same as the capital outlay plan, it's the same as capital for the budget. So having that next layer down, and I used to request it from the schools, I used to request it from any department really, and I used to regularly get it. Again, old articles, as Peter said, receipts, current and proposed, the recap sheet, and then the overlay 5-year history, along with proposed overlay. So those were the big numbers that I've always worked with in the past, and 20 years of doing this, and 6 years as a selectman. So for a quarter century, I've been using the same reports, the same kind of numbers to,
And you haven't gotten it right yet.
and I haven't gotten it right yet. So, but it's, I get a lot closer than a lot of other people.
So Joe, maybe what we do is, by the way, our next, in the special town meeting might interrupt this obviously, but our regularly scheduled meeting in September is September 8th in this same room at 6 o'clock. You could let me know, if you and Anne Marie are available to join us at that meeting, and others we can bring her back in and do the introduction and et cetera at that time, if that works for her. I can send you the list of these documents we'll be looking for before the end of the year, not, don't jump out and do it now. And we could at least, when she's here and you're here, have a discussion to make sure we all understand what we're actually asking for, and if we're asking for something that makes no sense or whatever, Just so we come to an
I'm going
agreement.
to start by saying yes, although I have to admit, there was a freeze on my end. So the last thing I heard was Dana saying that he's used this information for 20 years. I heard your witty comment, to which I reacted, and then it froze. And when I came back on my end, I heard you suggesting another meeting date. I didn't hear the meeting date.
Oh, I'm sorry. So our,
No, it's my computer from home.
no, it's okay.
That's
It's
the
technology.
glitch.
It's technology, no problem. Our next
Exactly.
regularly scheduled finance committee meeting, monthly meeting, is September 8th at 6 o'clock in this room. Okay? Just so you know. What I was saying in addition to that was, because of the timeline, and we're going to talk about that in a second, for the special town meeting, there may be other opportunities that make more sense. I don't know,
Sure.
so.
Yeah, so the answer still is
Yeah.
yes to your question about next meetings and certainly for the timeline. I want to emphasize that I heard Dana's list completely. There's nothing there that surprised me. And I know we have most of it generally. Two things I'd want to bear out, and I think you folks already know, maybe for the watching audience, should there be one, is we rely upon Munis, which is our fund accounting system. Now, the good news is Carol Capola, our former finance director, and Anne Marie Ellis, our current finance director, are both considered super users, and we're able to use some of our money to upgrade, so we're leveraging more technology with Munis, and I think, if anything, we'll see more robust reporting. However, I also remind everybody that where we're now in the second month of the first quarter, A lot of the data that we would see on the quarterly basis is probably going to be available, I would say, roughly, say, 10 to 15 days into the next quarter.
Yep.
Meaning, we'll be able to do a deeper dive in a lot of that data middle of October. But that's also good timing based on the time frame that I have
Sure.
for budget building.
Sure.
And then last but not least, if Anne Marie were joining us tonight, I would emphasize that she has been doing phenomenal work. And I remind everybody, including myself, that she's done that work and she's here less than a month. So she's still working with the team to close out fiscal year 22 and, to just get that done for sanity's sake, if nothing else. And then we'll be able to then, turn her attention to the special and then the annual. And we're getting there, but I am thrilled to have her on board with us.
And that's why I'm saying, Joe, don't take any of this like we need it tomorrow. It's gonna be in preparation for next year's budget, so we make sure that we, number one, agree as to what information we're gonna need to support our efforts, and you as well. And that we're prepared, just like you, to go into that budget process starting the 1st of January, basically, for us.
Sure, absolutely. And then the other part of that is the team, the department heads that you've spoken of before, are working on my directive to get preliminary, just give me thumbnail sketches of where you think you're at. And so I'll have that data end of this month. And after Labor Day, once I collate it, I'll certainly get some information to the board. And when I do that, I'll be sharing that with you folks as well. So that as we get meaningful data, I will make sure to share it with Finance Committee when I'm sharing it with the board as well.
Okay, great.
Because I agree with you, we're all on the same page and we're all working towards the same goal. And if anybody wanted to know, I believe it is 263 days until annual town meeting.
Okay. We'll count on you to keep track of that, please.
Yes,
Okay.
sir, yes, sir.
Okay, so there's going to be this whole topic of the special town meeting in September, but let me jump to item D, which is FinCom communication, just so we get that out of the way, and then we can spend the rest of the time with you talking about the special town meeting and what's involved there. Joe and I have had some correspondence back and forth about how this board, either as individual members or as a board, either requests information or communicates with both Joe and his staff, if you will. What I have told him, and I hope you folks will agree to this, and Joe and I have agreed to this, is that any information we either request or want to provide goes through myself, the chair, to the town administrator, and he ferrets it out or collects it from his people if it's a request to come back to me. In other words, I'm suggesting that none of us, and I'm not pointing fingers at you folks, I'm just saying none of us
Just point-
wake up one morning and say, hey, Joe, remember that thing, tell me about this. Because then, or asking one of his department heads, hey, how about this? Well, suddenly, a department head could take that request as being, oh, this is legitimate, I need to go run off and do it. And then Joe then says, well, wait, Malcolm didn't get this other stuff done. And they say, well, wait a minute, I had this request from Finance Committee. Well, no, you had a request from a member. So we want to establish that as a flow of communication. So it'll make things smoother. If you have something you need or a request you need or something you need to share, get it to me. I'll get it to Joe. He will get it to the appropriate people and vice versa as it flows this way. I mean, think of all 7 of us running into the finance director's office saying, give me this, give me that. It just doesn't work. It's chaos. So I hope you all agree with that. And Joe, I know you and I have had that discussion and we are together on that. So is that okay? All right, perfect. All right, now let's get back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. We just, we always try to make things better if we can, right? So there is a special town meeting called for September 29th, right?
27th.
27th, oh, good, I'm gonna change my date.
6
Good.
o'clock.
6 o'clock,
Put it on the
27th.
paper you get.
Two less days, okay. 6 PM. You did, just so you know, you had sent me a list of what was potentially in, for articles in the town meeting. At the time, there were 7. I shared that with my team, so they would at least come here, somewhat prepared this evening. And this evening, you gave us an improved list, if you will, and one of them has gone away, if I remember correctly.
That's correct, the cemetery regulations.
Yeah, okay, so it has gone away. So with that, why don't we first talk about the timeline to get from where we are today, the major milestones or whatever that need to happen, you know, when the warrant closes, when you have to advertise, you know, all that kind of thing to get us to the 27th, so we can make sure we can support whatever we need to do to help get it there.
Thank you, and I appreciate that opportunity. So right now, working with the team and with the board, we're working towards an August 22nd, which is the next board meeting because of their summer schedule, where the board is anticipated to close the warrant. And so with that, we would be looking to collect as much information as we can. And I think if you have the single sheet, double-sided, that passed out, that was what I presented to the board this past Monday evening. It's the document I shared with your chair Tuesday morning, knowing that you had already done your notification. And it's the document that John Giorgio is presently working from. So we anticipate there being no more than the 6 articles that you see in front of you. We anticipate them being substantially in that order. And I say that because of the last article about allocating previous appropriations if necessary. So August 22nd is when the board would like to finalize and close their warrant. We're doing that with a mind towards our vendor, so to speak, that is responsible for the formal and legal publishing of the warrant, and that is Cape Cod Chronicle. So we know that if we can get material to the Chronicle by, I think, the Thursday of that week is, say, August 25th, that they can ensure that it gets published in the newspaper in a date in September, which is 1 week more than we need. You know, I'm looking at folks that I worked with 3 years ago when we were hit with a tornado, and I bring that up only because you never know what's going to happen, so that's why we like to build some time in. Now, what we would have to do additionally, and this is separate from the original plan for the next year annual warrant, meaning generally I want warrants to be the warrant article, the explanation, the estimated cost, and as much as possible, the motion that supports that article. So for annual town meeting next year, that's the effort, is to have all of that encapsulated in the warrant document, as well as the standard vote tracking that we've been doing for the last 3 years. For our purposes to meet the charter requirement, I think what we're going to end up doing is having board votes referenced and finance committee votes to be provided at town meeting. That's because we can ensure that it's published in a timely manner, and it also doesn't hamstring you folks that you have more time to do your deliberations. I hope that made sense. That's what we're looking at right now. And Mr. Chairman, hearing you talk about a meeting on September 8th, that is something that I can factor in for our purposes as well, to make sure you have all the information you need if you're using, say, perhaps September 8th as your final deliberation night until town meeting evening.
Yeah, just as a point, Joe, August 24th through September 1st, I will be out of the country, quite frankly, but doesn't mean the board can't meet if they need to. You know, Karen can fill in his chair or whatever, but if we have enough time, getting to sometime early in September for a meeting to go through these things is okay with me, if that works. So Dana, did you have a point or comment?
Yeah, we also have a charter requirement to vote as a finance committee whether to include money articles in a special or not. We have agended it for tonight if we need to do it tonight, but if we're not doing it tonight, we're gonna have to do it. We're probably gonna have to call a meeting for like either after the selectmen's meeting on the next night or the same night, later that night or something like that, to take that vote. We vote whether to include them or not on a
Right,
special.
so which ones would that apply to? Let's just look at them quickly. We'll go through them in detail in a second, but
Article 1 is got $70,000, that would be the first one. Article 2 has got $75,000, that would be the second one. Article 3 is in $250,000. Article 4 has an estimated cost for labor contracts, if money's gonna be settled by then. Article 5 is surveyor has a cost, and Article 6, they're bringing back the money. I'm not sure if that will have an actual dollar figure in it or not. But the first 5 anyways, we would have to vote whether to include them or not.
So my suggestion is, well, go ahead, Joe, do you have something to say there?
First a statement and then a question, and I apologize, Dan, I was gonna interrupt and tell you that my knowledge is that all 6 have financial implications. The one that didn't was the cemetery regulations. But for my purposes, can you, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but can you direct me to that statutory requirement? I've searched for that, I'm not disputing it, I wanna make sure that I capture it going forward.
I'm not sure if it's in the bylaw or if it's in the charter, but I'll find
Oh,
it.
it's in the- okay, all right. I know I scoured the charter, I did not scour bylaws,
Yeah,
but thank you for the heads up on that one.
Okay, so if we're okay with that, my suggestion is let's go through each article one by one. Joe, why don't you explain it, and we can decide as we're talking about it whether we want to, we could take votes tonight if we wanted to
Yeah,
include it in the warrant, if it makes sense
Sure.
to us.
Yeah.
And by the way, I will tell you, just for a reference point, I do know that Karen Doucette had reviewed these beforehand, what I had sent her, and she had no problem including them in the warrant. Now, if you include it in the warrant, doesn't mean you're saying I'm voting for it.
Right.
It just means it's moving forward to the warrant, okay? So Joe, why don't you start with 1?
Sure, and this first article is the first article intentionally. I've been working with Dan Pelletier, as you would imagine, as our wastewater superintendent. And Dan has been very clear to both his board, his commission, the board of selectmen, and any chance he's had a chance to talk about wastewater. The effort for Article 1 is to continue the progress as we move through the comprehensive wastewater management plan, herein referred to as the CWMP as we know it. Article 1 has 2 distinct elements to it, however. The first, for me, is the last part listed. And that is to say, regarding phase 3 of the wastewater, the CWMP, as we did with phases 1 and 2, the town is contemplating acquisition of certain properties and the appropriations of funds to do the same for potential easements, for potential pump stations or other material, if you will, related to wastewater and related to phase 3. This is necessary, in my opinion, and Dan's belief as well, first, in the special, because he's presently working with GHD, our new engineering vendor, on the design and construction cost for phase 3 as we're progressing towards seeking DEP approval. So there are more articles that are intended to come up in the annual town meeting that may then cause the town to apply for the state revolving fund or SRF funding. So phase 3 element of Article 1 is for property acquisition and easements and the funding to do the same. And that's the $70,000 amount, quite frankly. Where it gets a little bit dicier, and I will tell you that I'm not going to make a direct reference to any properties, but Dan Pelletier has been talking to property owners that may be impacted on the potential easements, and there's general understanding of the process. But additionally, the second part of that article is related to the Route 28 dry sewer project. And as you may recall, the Route 28 dry sewer project is necessitated by Mass Department of Transportation has notified, I believe, Yarmouth, but certainly Dennis and Harwich, that they intend on doing a future fiscal year Route 28 road improvement project. And therefore, we've all been put on notice that if you need something put in the ground, you need to do it before the project commences. And so what Dan is contemplating for that is, just as it says, the installation of dry pipe for the Route 28 project, as well as related pump stations for Route 28 work, meaning getting that tied in first. Now, for me, I would not ask you folks to take a recommendation this evening, because that's that other element where the town is still trying to understand our options, and given the complexity of it, it is likely a matter to go before the board in executive session because it may entail a more complex land acquisition. So 70,000 is the number that we expect to hold on any of the easements related to Phase 3. It's the other dollar amount related to the dry pipe and related acquisitions that we're still working on.
Okay, and Joe, the 70,000, is that mainly just legal work? I mean, is it, if you ended up in the past, you had to pay some people some money for easements, or?
Correct. It's meant to pay for the recordings, the process that's entailed for that, and if there is any remuneration for the easements, we would set that aside.
Okay,
Precisely, yep.
okay, Dana.
And do you have a source for that? Is that coming from water, or is that coming from town receipts?
So right now, we do not have a funding source identified for that because we're closing out fiscal year 22.
Yeah.
And I can speak at greater length once we do all the articles about a certain funding source presently that we may or may not want to avail ourselves of while Anne Marie closes the books to get a better understanding of other funding sources.
Okay. Mark.
Question, at the last town meeting.
So Mark Keller, you can't, you
Mark
can't say.
Kelleher, West Harwich.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion, I think I heard at the last town meeting, it'd be very helpful to have a map so that people can envision where these are.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Point well taken. We will never not do that again for sure. So whenever possible, we will include that in the appendix of the warrant. We will also make sure that it is stationed throughout Town Hall and other places for inspection. So thank you very much. Point very well taken.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so on your recommendation, you recommend we just sit on this one until there's more information about the dry sewer part of it?
Well, yes, other than if you're, and I wasn't entirely sure, if it's your process to vote to include it in the warrant, and that is irrespective of future votes on funding, the board intends this to remain in the warrant. So if you feel comfortable keeping it in the warrant.
That's an important clarification, Joe. Thank you. Dana?
I move that we include this in the warrant.
A second?
Okay, moved and seconded to include in the warrant Article 1 of the special town meeting, which is titled Acquisition of Property Interest and Appropriation of Funds for the Route 28 Dry Sewer Project and Phase 3 Wastewater Project.
Do a roll call.
Oh, yeah. Any discussion?
The question, could some words be worked in here that control what additional costs would be involved? Because if we're sitting there suggesting $70,000, that's fine. But if this thing is going to be $270,000, we shouldn't vote positively.
So what we're doing tonight with this particular motion is saying that we either agree or don't agree to put this article in the warrant. We're not saying we support the article, but just the ability to get it on town meeting floor via the warrant.
Okay.
If the selectmen later decide that it doesn't make sense and they're gonna, pull it for some reason or modify it, then we'll have to look at it again. But it's not saying we support it or not, it's just whether or not we agree it can go in the warrant, that's all. Yeah, you're right, this could be, I'm making up a number, $7 million, I don't know, I mean, it could be anything, right? But it's not there yet, and as Dana said, there's no funding source, I mean, there's nothing identified there. It's merely to structure the warrant so we can get that structure to move. We gotta start with something, right? Dana?
I only see doing some of these tonight if we can, to save us from meeting next week after the selectmen's meeting to do it, if we're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable that this is gonna be the reason we're calling the special town meeting. We might as well have the article in the warrant. If it comes to the point where we don't want to support it, we'll argue against it. But, that comes to dollars and cents later, after we have a money source, after we have reasons, after we have, people talking to us about it. But whether it should be here or not, I think this is the reason we're calling the meeting. I might not have that same feeling on some of the others, but I do on this one.
Well, that's okay. Okay, any further discussion? All right, we'll put it to a vote, we're gonna do a roll call vote, so Mark?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Dana?
Aye.
Chairman's an aye. Okay, that one's in.
Thank you.
5-0. Okay, the second one, bylaw charter review resource funding.
So this article came about when I've been meeting, I think at least 3 times since Maytown meeting, regularly with the bylaw charter review committee. And I think, as you folks know, as I struggle to build the calendar, there's the calendar that works, and unfortunately there's the calendar that comports to the charter, meaning there are a number of disconnects. One example would be, as I said earlier, the charter requires me to give the selectmen a full financial assessment by October 1st. The charter also requires the finance director to give the board a sense of revenue by October 1st. The problem with the revenue, as I just said, is September 30th is quarter end. So we don't have complete quarter data, let me try to not say that like a Bostonian, for revenue. That's one of the many disconnects that we found in the charter. So the bylaw charter review committee has indicated that they would be interested in a study through a vendor resource concurrent with evaluation by the Board of Selectmen to contemplate changes first to the charter and some of these changes to be presented as soon as the 2023 annual town meeting. Now, the dollar amount comes out of the fact that there's very little information as to when the last comprehensive review of the charter was done. I know from past experience in other communities, many times a special act or home rule charter will talk about a decennial review. In talking to the members of the bylaw charter review, they refer back to the adoption of a 2006 charter, which I think is the basis of our current document, and various what I would call one-off charter changes. And so now this effort contemplates, if we are going to start working on a comprehensive look at our charter, let's do it starting in September with an eye towards trying to get something come back before the Assembly in May. I want to be as upfront and clear as I can be. The $75,000 amount is purposeful for 2 reasons. It comports with my ability under the board's policy to sign contracts of $75,000 or less, because this would be a general law 30B contract. And it is also meant to be of a significant level so that we are required to seek requests for proposals, probably not invitation for bids, but more a strong request for proposals, so that when we do this dollar amount is meant to start what should be a multi-year project of reviewing first the charter and then bylaws, general bylaws, and perhaps before that zoning bylaws.
So Joe, what kind of a firm typically does that? A legal firm that specializes in municipal work, or?
We can certainly do that. There's a number of those, but I can't say who I would hire.
No, I understand that. No, I'm just talking about what type. I mean,
No, that wasn't you, that was me. I almost said something. However, I know as a former clerk, there are several vendors that are in the code business, whereby they have subject matter experts that we would hire them to say, first do an analysis of the disconnects, and you get a comprehensive, say, 5 to 7 page report. Any of those code companies can do that, and within those code companies, they have attorneys on staff. You can also then say to them, look through your database, if you will, of municipalities whose codes you have to recommend starting language. And so we could certainly we could very easily rely upon KP Law, because they certainly have the ability to do that. But what I'm suggesting is the RFP would attract, I would say, the 3 to 5 nationally based code companies that do this work.
and Dana will ask the question, the source of funding?
So there is a source of funding that is contemplated for this article and future articles that ties back to the cost savings that we know for certain are present in fiscal year 23, and that goes back to the Monomoy Regional School District assessment, that change that was approved, and the Cape Tech excess and deficiency, for lack of a better word, I'll put this in air quotes, rebate, because they had their funds audited by the state and they were determined to be too high on excess and deficiency. So every member community was notified of a first quarter fiscal year 23 rebate. So we have these cost savings now that, and in a moment, if you'll give me a moment, I'll call up my spreadsheet for the numbers right now, but I know it's in excess of $900,000. So I've told the board that we know for certain, when I say we, I mean in this case, myself and the finance director, that these funds are available because of the cost savings, and that's meant not to be a congratulatory statement. That's meant for me to say the better use of financial terms. And it's something that our predecessor finance director had advised me that whatever we end up doing with the money, we want to make sure in the end, and that's Article 6, that we reallocate any of those cost savings to any number of funds or purposes.
Okay. Dana?
I guess my general question is about, is this all just coming from the committee or just your work with them? Or do you, I just go back to the very first charter that took us from 3 full-time selectmen to a part-time board with a town administrator. It was a pretty broad-based kind of group of people that got together and kind of started with different local charters and worked them into the Harwich Charter. If this is all coming from you and that committee, it seems like it should be a little bit more broader base with more people participating. I know myself, I've been involved with the charter for several years and have written part of it that still exists. And I would be just as interested in this as other people are in other things. I just wondering where is the committee? Is there a committee?
My response is to the last thing you said, and my personal response is absolutely. Meaning, my experience in other municipalities is that when you undertake this decennial, 10-year project, that you do it above and beyond just the usual committees, if you will. Having said that, and I neglected to say it earlier, the board is scheduled to meet in joint meeting at their meeting on August 22nd with the bylaw charter review committee. First, I think, Dana, to your point, which is an excellent point, and I can't emphasize that strongly enough from my perspective, of are we going to commit to this? And if we are, because again, for me, just as administrator, I have many, many thoughts, but for me, this is meant to be at a higher level. It is meant to be the executive branch and the committee primarily charged with it. And I would hope that their discussion on the 22nd includes that, because I think you're absolutely right. We want to rely upon subject matter experts and dispassionate writers, if you will, in the code companies. But you need to rely upon the community to say what you want your laws to be. And so I, for one, am not authorized, nor have I had those conversations with that group. But I think if the town is contemplating what I've known in other communities to be a special charter review committee, I think towns are very well served with that myself. So Dana, I hope that's how the discussion goes on the 22nd.
And just one other question, if I may. Having just successfully completed a town meeting where we showed up the first night and argued taking $75,000 out of a study on the middle school down in Sisson Road there, what makes this $75,000 different than that? Is this not just a study, or is this something we could do in-house, or sell me a team? Oh, I think he froze up again.
So I froze again.
Okay, you're back.
And what I heard was a middle school. I think I know the address. But truly, I didn't hear anything beyond that. But whether you want to repeat it or not, I understand where you're coming from. I can tell you that there are critical differences in the asks that are being done. But truly, I crafted these articles, and I want to be clear about that. To start this process, I was the editor and writer of these articles to initiate discussion. Article 2 is meant to follow up on keen interest of the bylaw charter review and the Board of Selectmen.
You have more questions?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was gonna
You
make a
gonna make a
motion.
motion?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
I move that we include Article 2 in the warrant.
I second.
It's moved and seconded to include Article 2, which, by the way, is the bylaw to charter review resource funding. Is there any further discussion or any discussion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote again as to include it in the warrant, not to support it, but to put it in the warrant, if you will. Mark Keller?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Dana?
Aye.
Peter? Aye. So again, 5-0 vote to include it.
Thank you, folks.
No problem. Article 3, everybody's favorite, so
That was a tough one.
Article 3 is my personal embarrassment. As I explained to the Board of Selectmen, and in my household, we call that self-reporting. There was a mistake that was made, and I was the author of that mistake. And the mistake in this instance was actually an omission. And what you will see in the warrant, should this continue forward, is a recap of the capital outlay plan, specifically the budget for fiscal year 23, which envisioned this dollar amount of $250,000 for the purposes of the town going out and hiring the town's owner's project manager. That plan was approved by town meeting, but I neglected to include the appropriating article to actually do that procurement.
So
This article is intended to correct that omission by me, and I'd be more than happy to speak to what I think are the merits of it, but rather I'll just yield for now. That's the purpose of the article, is to correct the omission from the May 2022 annual town meeting.
Okay, Joe, so I apologize if I'm backing up a little bit, but the last I basically heard of this whole thing is Brooks Academy, as far as the structural stuff goes, was at the annual town meeting, May of 2021, we're in the football field, right?
Correct.
And the article is brought up, it's a very short article, talking about structural improvements, I guess I would describe it as. But I haven't heard what's happened, if anything, since. So could you, and I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I'd like to just, can you give us an update on what's been going on?
I certainly can. I also want to tell you that David Spitz, chair of the Brooks Academy Museum Committee, who, for lack of a better term, has been the town's owner's project manager, has been keeping me up to date, and we're meeting again next week for next steps. And I know David is very keen to have this funding go forward. The town, building off of that article in 2021, took the next step of then seeking architectural and engineering studies and telling us what the next steps were. We had ample information then to use that to construct a bid for proposals where the town was contemplating the work envisioned, meaning the shoring up of the building and everything to do with the foundation. And again, if memory serves correctly, town was able to draw upon community preservation funds as well as capital outlay funds. Well, as you can imagine, anyone that went out to bid in 2021 through the present time in 2022 on any sort of construction-related project, the bids are coming in far exceeding what the town has set aside for funding. Now, this article that was contemplated in May was intended for us to have an owner's project manager, which is required under Chapter 30B and other procurement laws. When you have a construction project, and even though Brooks Academy is not being constructed, but the renovations are considered to be construction, and the costs are considered to exceed in total over the life of the project $1 million, you must hire an owner's project manager. Now, I, for one, as the town's chief procurement officer, am eternally grateful for that requirement, because there's nothing better for the town than to have the owner's project manager run it. Because if there is a mistake by the construction company and the OPM doesn't pick up on it, the town has a right of grievance and redress through the OPM. If the OPM misses something that the construction company wasn't aware of, same thing. Not to scare the audience away, but the OPM is the town's middleman, and the town's primary protection on liability. Now, having said all that, it's a requirement and it's a best practice. Now, David, I think, is going to meet with me next week to tell me where we're at on the second round of bidding to try and get the construction cost so that we can go before town meeting next spring with good, hard numbers that will last on funding the construction and rehabilitation work.
Okay, so if I understand it from the article, my simple understanding of the article is we're gonna jack up the building, either keep it there, get the foundation out and put a new one in and set it back down, or we're gonna move it over here, keep it jacked up, build the foundation and move it back, right?
Essentially, yes. David Spitz is the better person to say that, but I believe that captures the essence of what Sean Libby and the team were saying, and the engineers and architects were saying we should do.
No, I understand, but we're not adding to the building, we're not going up, we're not going sideways, just keeping the same footprint and putting a basement, right?
I believe there's shoring up, for lack of a better word, internally, and I believe there are going to be some enhancements, if memory serves correctly, in the basement itself. Now, when I say enhancements, if you've seen the basement now, it's a classic New England dugout basement.
Yeah.
I think the enhancements would be more supporting the infrastructure that's there. But essentially, that is the effort.
Okay,
to make sure that that ancient building stands for another 100 years.
right, so I'm just trying to clarify, and I'm not trying to cause difficulty here, but for instance, we're not building out the basement to be 20 offices with bathrooms and whatever, right? We're just doing structural
You're
work.
absolutely correct in that we are not doing that.
Okay, so I read a Cape Cod Times article that I saw, just happened to catch it, I don't know whether it was Facebook or someplace a couple weeks ago, and at Bray's Farm, you familiar with that, in Yarmouth?
I'm not, but I will make myself
Okay,
aware.
they have a huge old historic barn, and I mean it's huge, that they just completed lifting up, moving over here, getting rid of the old foundation, putting a new one in and bringing it back. And what it said in the article, and I don't know what to believe, but it identified the contractors and everybody working on it. And they said in the article it was funded by community preservation funds, and the number they had in the article was $300,000. Now, it probably isn't as complex a building and, that kind of thing, but there are folks out there doing this. They're just finishing this project now, now, and then they're going back to the town or community preservation folks to, I guess they gotta put a new roof on it, or whatever it is they gotta do to, make the thing nice after they get the structural part done. So, and they were local folks. I mean, if you look at it. So I encourage you to look at it. I think the project manager stuff is essential. I mean, I agree. My only question there would become, if the project really, if you bid it and it was less than $1 million, then you're off the hook. But I think it's money well spent to have someone else looking at it during that whole process, myself. Otherwise, I think we're opening ourselves up to, not getting a sufficient product, let's put it that way. And by the way, the 250...
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
What's that?
I said, may I respond, but it's...
Yeah, sure.
it's
Yep.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. To the last point, I couldn't agree more, because what I'm struck by is we have these major renovation projects and we have department heads that are skilled, but none of us are skilled at being construction managers, not even our facilities manager. And even if he were, he would say, you don't want to do that. You don't want this, the town to bear that burden, so I appreciate that. The project that you're talking about that's underway right now, one of my first key takeaways from that is exactly, that project's underway now. When we were trying to get underway, projects were already already bid out and already committed. And, with everything we've seen during the pandemic, everybody rushed to do projects in buildings because people weren't in the buildings.
Sure.
And so it doesn't surprise me that they're underway. It also doesn't surprise me for that dollar amount, because I do think ours it has more complexity to it. But in addition to that, I also took a moment in the spirit of full disclosure to try to give you a better answer. So I found information on the bid specs that we were looking for when we went out to bid recently, and I certainly wouldn't bore you with all the details, but the bid specs that we were working on, that we would look to be working on in the future, talk about, as you can imagine, site work being structural demolition, excavation, backfill, bracing and all of that. You know, you've got your concrete, masonry, metal, wood, plastics, and composites. And then as we get back to the old building itself, project also contemplates, beyond the shoring up, updates to fire suppression, plumbing, HVAC, and electrical. So again, Mr. Chairman, to your point, you know, not for the purposes of putting in offices of any way, shape, or form, but bringing the building up to modern time for the infrastructure. And I know that's because our facilities manager and others, when they were reviewing it, you know, a lot of the wear and tear on the building was a result of the building itself and the way that the apparatus are there. So I hope that helps. Again, the project is meant to shore it up and to bring certain other items, I wouldn't say up to code, but I would say up to more modern standards in usability.
So Joe, could I, on that topic then, could I ask the question, and that is, have you circled back or can you circle back with town council to see if those things like HVAC fall under the scope of what was written for the article? Because it just talks about structural improvements. I mean, I don't see anything else in there. So I'm just asking the question, does that kind of work fall within the scope of what the article says? I'm not trying to raise, you know, a problem.
No, I think it's a fair point, and I'm not entirely mindful of which article. My understanding is coming into this project, there are several different funding sources that tie back to this. So there is certainly work that gets to preservation under community preservation and structural work, but you raise a fair point, Mr. Chairman, and out of an abundance of caution, I'll make sure we're proceeding on the right path.
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm just looking at the article, right? So it says that the total cost, estimated cost is $1,150,000, that Community Preservation Act funds are gonna pay $485,734.55. I don't know, you know, we got that number down. From the historic
might have gone up a
reserve.
nickel.
And from and then $664,265.45 from estimated annual revenue for fiscal year 2022 for that total. So, but what I think what you're telling me is, because you at least think originally the bids were over $1 million, right? That what's the funding source for the project manager? Because that takes it above what's here for the $1,150,000.
And thank you, and that again was the purpose for the article. So originally, in fiscal year 23 capital plan, the funding source for the $250,000 was coming out of free cash. So that was factored into all of our equations, but the appropriating article was not there. Given the cost savings that we have presently, at this moment, and again, subject to change once the finance director identifies other areas, but this is a cost that could come under the cost savings that are that we know are available presently in fiscal year 23.
Okay. Questions, Dana?
You don't see this position as being any kind of permanent position? It's just for this project, and then you would hire a different one if it was another project?
Excellent question, thank you very much. That's the other beauty of it. The town would be soliciting requests for proposals for owners, project managers of a similar ability to the project. And their job is to bring the project through whatever stage it's in, through final completion, punch list walkthrough, and close out to the town's satisfaction, and then the OPM is dismissed.
And
So it's not a position, it's not an add to staff, and not to be crass, there are no benefits or pensions or anything like that to pay.
well, when you say owner's project manager, it could be a firm doing it, or it could be an individual, I guess, right?
Traditionally, we would expect it to be a firm, and the firm may ask to identify an individual,
Right.
or they may ask to use it as a firm. So we'd have that language in the RFP to make sure we have the flexibility to choose the best option.
Yeah, when Monomoy was done, there was a project manager and it was a firm, and they identified a lead person, whatever, if you will, right?
Exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I could very quickly, hopefully to give some relief, I think I may have some more information that will help, but again, I will still bring your questions to council, but in the original bid materials, and I say this because they were written by council, it indicates that the town was looking for scope of work that included removal and then reinstallation of fire protection piping, plumbing piping, electrical distribution and HVAC ductwork, and piping to allow the installation of the first floor structural elements. And so those HVAC and other projects are still tied to the structural work.
Yeah, so what that is, Joe, when you go to lift up the building, you gotta cut all those systems off at the interface between the first floor and the basement. Then you raise them up, and then when you bring it back, you gotta reattach everything. It doesn't mean, though, that you're putting in, I don't know, 62 new condensers for an air conditioning system, you know what I mean?
Correct, thank you.
But I can see a rationale that says, hey, while we're doing this, we might as well upgrade it, but that I don't think is what the article says, so I would appreciate a clarification from town council.
I certainly will, and I know I can metaphorically hear David Spitz screaming in my ears, because I know he's already covered this with me. I don't have my notes in front of me. I believe the upgrade that you speak of is going to be a future request in the capital plan.
And that would be good to know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But to your point, right, to stay within the confines of the spirit, intent, and purpose of the article, that's what it's related to.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Dana?
Thank you.
Dana.
Sorry it took so long to extricate myself.
No, we want to understand.
With that in mind, unless there's other questions, I'd move to include it.
I second.
Okay, moving and seconded to include Article 3 in the special fund the town owner's project manager related to ongoing renovation work at Brooks Academy Museum. Again, this is only to include it in the warrant. Discussion,
Oh, I'm sorry.
don't jump the gun. Discussion on that topic, or that motion? All right, hearing none. Mark, Keller,
Aye.
Dana?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous, 5-0, you got it.
Thank you.
And Joe, just when this gets to town meeting floor, I think it's gonna be important to explain what we just went through regarding what it includes and doesn't include, and that there would be a future, ask, if you will.
Absolutely. Point well taken. I appreciate that. Like I said, I know when I hear from David in the morning, he's going to tell me that's the purpose of our meeting next week. So thank you for that.
Okay, Article 4, fund negotiated contract.
So Article 4, first of all, this relates to the last collective bargaining association that was not under present contract with the town for fiscal year 22. I can now tell you that the board voted Monday evening to agree to a 1-year contract with the SEIU union, which is our managers union, and then agreed to the 3-year that we've been negotiating with all other groups. As you may recall, at our annual town meeting in May, the Article 4, line item number 2, which was, I believe, salary and wages under the Board of Selectmen line item, there was a dollar amount set aside to help fund collective bargaining agreements that we strike on a regular basis in the present fiscal year. I bring that up because we are progressing very well through all of the negotiations. More than half of them are at a level of either agreement or subject to ratification vote. So we're really making great progress. With regard to SEIU, first of all, I got to stop and, as the town's personnel administrator, and just thank everybody that brought us to this point, because it is a great statement to say that we have all of our associations under agreement for fiscal year 22. Now, knowing that we're in fiscal year 23 and negotiating 3-year contracts across the board, this article only relates to fiscal year 22, and there are a number of different funding sources. The standard that I would go to is the present money available, as I've spoken of with every other article. However, it may be possible before town meeting to envision that there is funds available under that fiscal year 23, Article 4, line item 2, that we may contemplate using for fiscal year 22. To do so would require updated language change both in the warrant and in the motion for sure. At present, the board is aware that the funding for it is presently available and the available cost savings. It could be that we may take another route, but right now that's the only one that might have more than one potential funding source.
You have a ballpark number?
The ballpark right now is, sorry, my watch is talking to me. The ballpark figure would be that it would not be, it would not match any of the 3 years, any of each of the 3 years costs for the fiscal year 23 to 25. If I had to put a number on it, I think it's going to come in less than $30,000. Certainly less than $50,000. And I could be way overshooting on that as well. I just don't want to go low and have it come in high.
But you'll know that number before town meeting.
Absolutely, and as soon as we know that number, I'll share it again with everyone.
Yeah, okay. All right.
And this is for this group, it doesn't affect, for example, the section of the town that I work in.
Correct, this is only for SEIU, because SEIU is the only association not operating under a fiscal year 22 contract.
So basically this
Organization data.
this cleans up FY '22, quite frankly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for collective bargaining purposes, it closes out fiscal year 22.
If you want to sit out, well, you can.
No, I can make a motion.
Okay, all right,
I
good.
move that we include this article in the warrant.
I second.
Okay, moved and seconded to include Article 4 in the special fund negotiated contract. Estimated cost between $30,000 and $50,000. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote. Mark?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Angelo? Dana?
Aye.
I'm an aye, 5-0. You're on a roll, Joe.
Thank you, folks. And with that note, this might be the one where the roll stops. And I say that because this is an article that I have contemplated as the personnel administrator. And there's a bit of a story behind it. So, as you may know, the town engineer position, which is an SEIU union position, was vacated a year ago, May, by the incumbent at that time. And he went on to bigger and better things, and we miss him tremendously, but we congratulate him for his career advancement. And I had indicated to the board that, you know, we're going to have a difficult time attracting a town engineer, because the reality was that's going back, I believe, to 2018, when the position of surveyor, which is a position in the HEA association, so different from SEIU, was vacated. It was translated into a expense line item under the engineer. That is to say that the town engineer that worked here up until last year only had the benefit of $5,000 for survey work. Now, that didn't work in 19 or 20, let alone the work that the time frame that we're in now. So recognizing that I have an obligation under collective bargaining agreements to make memberships whole if we have funding, but recognizing that the town has not appropriated a salary line item for the surveyor position, I believe, since fiscal year 2018, I do not think I can successfully search for a new town engineer, which is a position that is funded, but we are also presently relying upon engineering firms to fill in the gap, that I will be successful in attracting a town engineer who finds out that there is not a town surveyor or the equivalency for a contract. And that's what this article is meant to correct. So again, it's something that I put in there to try to better the town's chances to fill the position of town engineer, but I've always understood that it was meant to be complementary positions whereby the surveyor at a lesser salary would report to the town engineer, and the two of them would work together on engineering and survey matters. Last but not least, the other reason why the town was not pursuing filling both of these roles is we literally had no room at Town Hall for both of those positions, their equipment. And Mr. Chairman, this is why I continue to refer to the former middle school by its address, because if the town can rely upon space in 204 Sisson Road, we may be able to move people around, not necessarily the engineer and the surveyor, but move people around to accommodate these positions. Because I've heard the board, I've heard constituents, and I've heard departments clear that we need an engineer and a surveyor on staff. The surveyor has not been funded and cannot be filled as a position unless we have appropriation.
Okay, so first of all, I can't wait for the plan to see how you want to populate 204 Sisson Road. I'm anxious to see it.
Actively working on it.
I know. So let me ask the question because I don't know the answer. What have we been doing without a town engineer, without a surveyor? Are we contracting out to AE firms or something to do the work?
Precisely, and so what we've been doing is we have any number of engineering firms, depending upon the procurement or project need. So you may hear that, and then again, this is separate from GHD, which is wastewater, but you'll hear that the town every now and then executes a contract with VHB, one of the premier firms out there when it's road work or road related, that we certainly rely upon JM O'Reilly for other projects or small construction projects. So we're relying upon engineering firms to fill the need for engineering services. Surveyor has been more difficult because $5,000 doesn't get you out in the door anymore, let alone a survey. Now this also ties back, as you may recall, to Article 39 of our most recent annual town meeting, where the town has an article that talks about using upwards of $500,000 for the purpose of getting owners unknown and other tax title, lien, and type of properties back onto the tax rolls. And so we're contemplating a procurement of resources for that, but absent that, the town's still going to need a resident expert who can help us translate to those firms the actual need. So it's meant to move forward.
Okay, so what you're telling me, Joe, and this is a question I think the average person might have, we do have enough work to keep this person gainfully employed, the surveyor I'm talking about.
Yeah, there is no question in my mind that is absolutely the case.
Yeah, okay, all right. And you think when you're out trying to recruit a town engineer, you're saying that if you had a town engineer without a surveyor, it's less attractive because the town engineer may have to do some of the surveying, or they have to go work with other firms to get surveying done?
Well, not to bring, I'm going to suggest that this comment is a hypothetical.
Yeah.
And if you believe that there was someone that said it, I wouldn't dissuade you from that. But a recent town engineer told me that if he had been aware of the survey situation, because he is not licensed nor authorized to survey
Right.
nor stamp said plans, it was exceedingly difficult to work as the town engineer. And so that has stayed in my craw from the day it was mentioned to me, and we tried to figure it out while we had an engineer on staff. Other people have told me since then that don't blame that person. You can't have an engineer without them being able to rely upon the surveyor. And quite frankly, what I'm suggesting is the situation we had in 2018 before those two qualified and credible professionals chose to retire was the model we should have kept.
Okay. Dana?
I guess I come up with two questions. One would be, where we have a line item in a budget that doesn't have enough money, is this something that the Finance Committee Reserve Fund could look at?
Certainly is. I wouldn't say no to that. My mindset was simply, before I asked anyone else to do that, I had to construct something on my end. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. The other thing I will tell you is that I've mentioned that we're in negotiations with certain present groups. You can imagine that the town is still in negotiation with the HEA, but you might also imagine that there were discussions about that position.
Okay,
And so we know that it is not a new position. It is a role that they still recognize in their roster, but the town simply has not funded the position.
Yep. Got it. Dana, keep
And the
going.
second part of that is just, in the other articles, we've kind of seen some of what the urgency is to get that done now rather than wait to annual town meeting, knowing that we have a reserve fund, is what makes this need to be done now rather than wait till town meeting?
I guess my answer to that would be the only need is for me to signal that I've been listening to the concerns that many people have said, that the town should have an engineer on staff, as we did, as was always intended. And if we're going to do that, we need to have a surveyor on staff as well. Now, to the question of urgency, I'm not going to argue at all as to whether or not it's urgent, but I can tell you, and this is not meant to be me being cute, but it does allow me to say that I'm making a good faith effort to restore these positions. If we do it in September, helpful. If we wait till May, I think we're still okay.
Quite frankly, with all the kind of work that's going on around town, I think not having a town engineer is opening us to some liability, I think. I mean, just my
That's
opinion.
always, that's always my concern, Peter.
Yeah.
I tell folks that that's my first job is liability avoidance.
Okay. You want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move that we include this in the warrant.
Second?
Moved and seconded to include Article 5, fund the existing position of surveyor in the warrant. Discussion?
Just for future reference, I know that there's plenty of work right now, but this could be a regional solution with Chatham or Brewster for future reference. I know you have a lot of work right now, but I could anticipate in 3 or 4 years that maybe when the real estate market closes down, you get all these properties back on the tax roll, that's where we should start to look at regionalization. That's all for future reference.
Did you hear that, Joe?
I did, and my first reaction would be, I'm not averse at all to partnerships and regionalization of any sort. Whatever makes most sense.
Okay. Further discussion? All right, you ready for a vote?
Aye.
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 Dana?
Aye.
Aye. You got another one, Joe?
Thank you.
Number 6, and final.
So last but certainly no means least, and I will share that if we didn't have a special town meeting in September, we would have to have a special town meeting for the article on the appropriation for the contract, because labor law requires us to make every due diligent effort to fund it as expeditiously as possible. If we didn't have a special, we would have had it for the wastewater, because I think it's the prudent thing to do. But if we didn't have any other reason, this would be the reason to do it. And the purpose of Article 6 is to allocate the cost savings of whatever level they're at that are first derived from the Monomoy Regional School District assessment cost savings and the Cape Cod Tech excess and deficiency first quarter rebate. Really, the question right now is, I told you that the number, and again, I'm going off of, well, excuse me, I brought it back up. I don't have to go by memory anymore. The cost savings for the Monomoy assessment is at $739,747. So I can say that one more time. That's $739,747. Again, that was anticipated in May on the hope that Chatham would change the assessment, and the Commissioner Elementary and Secondary Education would agree, and they've agreed, and it's in place. The second dollar amount was much more of a surprise, and if memory serves correct, the notice came in June, and the notice was that because they had too much excess deficiency, Cape Cod Regional Technical High School District had to effect a rebate, as I've said earlier, and the rebate in first quarter that was rebated off of our first quarter assessment payment is in the amount of $183,394. Now, simple arithmetic tells us that those cost savings equal $923,141. And again, the best practice, as it was recommended by our former finance director, that is supported by our current finance director, that you don't want, because they happen immediately in the fiscal year, and they're encroaching on close to $1 million, you don't want that money just lingering or hanging out there. So the best practice is to, at a special town meeting, have an article such as Article 6 that reallocates it to any number of locations. And I say that because the Board of Selectmen have asked me Monday night, and Anne Marie Ellis and I will work on the list, and I can give you a flavor of some of the things I think you folks have already mentioned, some of them in your earlier discussions. If we were to rely upon those savings for every one of the articles that we've already mentioned, and I'm not suggesting that's where it will end, but if we did, that would have a remainder of $413,141. I say that because we can't put a dollar amount yet, and I know from years of service as a former town meeting moderator that we want to make sure that the article is crafted in such a way that we have the highest number possible, so that if it comes lower, we're not exceeding the scope. So the highest number possible is that $923,141, and the lowest number potentially could go as low as the 413,000. So really the article then, the question is going to be is how much is it and where do we send it? And for that, again, I'll be making recommendations to the board, but I do think that's a conversation that you folks should have in earnest, the board should have in earnest, and perhaps ahead of town meeting, we all get together and decide the best way to do that.
Dana?
These two, the articles, when they were passed at town meeting, the motion was to raise and appropriate them, so it came from taxes, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Could we make the article title a little more descriptive?
Do you hear the question?
Joe?
Yes, we can, and I don't have that ability yet. However, I suspect that when Attorney Giorgio says, what exactly is this article going to do, we will have greater clarity in the headline.
Thank you.
Just like the structural work, Empress Academy. Right? Dana?
Based on that, and seeing it's the only other one left, I would, hopefully we can ask why the cemetery one was taken out, but I would move to include this article in the warrant.
Second?
Okay, moving and second to include Article 6, which is called Allocate Funds Appropriated at the 2022 Annual Town Meeting into the special. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote. Mark?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Angela? Dana?
Aye.
Aye. Another 5-0, so you got it.
Thank you, folks. And Mr. Chairman, could I take the liberty to answer the question before it's asked?
Yes.
I think it's germane. The Cemetery Commission and the Cemetery Administrator were hoping to get regulations updated at the annual town meeting. And we in our due diligence of the process, it was affirmed that those have to be done at town meeting, but it was also affirmed that there has to be a public hearing process. The public hearing did not occur prior to the annual town meeting, and staff has worked, Cemetery Administrator with the Cemetery Commission, to envision a public hearing. The concern is they will not be able to convene that in time for them to make recommendations. Therefore, they requested that the cemetery regulations come before town meeting in May. However, the directive was offered by me and they were already on it. They expect to have a public hearing late September, early fall on that matter, so it is done well in advance of town meeting next year.
Okay, great. Dana?
Only because I had strong objections to the existing language that we have now and the few changes they were trying to make in the past. I actually worked with the cemetery group to make sure that all of those objections were satisfied and included in what is being presented. So I know that what is being contemplated to be presented, as long as it doesn't change, is far superior to what we have now.
Then if it came up, we would have voted against it.
You probably
Basically,
could.
I
Mr.
had
Chairman, could I just add that I knew that only because the chair of the board said, well, you better tell Dana, because he's been looking for these things to change for years. So, Mr. DeCosta, that's in the record.
He's all about cemeteries, so.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, do we have anything else for Joe? Okay, Joe, we appreciate you welcome to hang in. We're just gonna do some old business and whatnot, but if you wanna, cut off, that's okay too, so.
I think I have an obligation locally to check in on things, but...
You should do that.
And if I could, thank you again. And I do want to take this opportunity, Mr. Chair, if I could. I don't often speak about my own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, but I'm going to take the opportunity now to do so. I can't thank you folks enough, not just for what you do day in and day out, but for what you've done tonight. I've often said to people, and the reason why I track how many days till town meeting is because town meeting, in my opinion, is the most important thing that I can work on, and I think it's the most important thing that we all work on. Having said that, as an agent of the executive branch, I understand, honor, and respect your role. You folks are the first line of defense and inquiry for town meeting itself. So I look forward to future discussions, future disagreements, but in the end, I know, as you folks have already said, we are all doing this for our beloved town, and I can't thank you folks enough. So I appreciate the time tonight, and I thank you for the efforts that you do, because I know you do more work than anybody.
Okay, Joe, now we'll get to that list of the requests for documentation from you and the finance director, just so you have it, you know, the reports we're looking for at some point in time.
Excellent. Thanks
Yep.
very much, and enjoy the rest of the summer.
All right, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, anything else on those topics? You're almost ready to go home, right? On the road business, we had the timeline year ahead, that's what Karen's been putting together. She will continue to update this. Dana, did you have something?
Yeah, I handed out for her at her request, she sent it to me. I'll just say that, you know, they're working on new timelines, they're working on new dates, they're working on new potential charter language, but there are a lot of charter requirements that are in there that we've tried to make in the past, that we'll be skipping over under this new timeline, so just keep that in mind. The charter is still there and still asks us to do certain things, but we're gonna be skipping right over it.
Okay, can you give me your list of documents so I can?
Yes,
Please.
the only one we added,
Give it to me.
the only one we really want to add is OPEB. You added that, or suggested that,
Okay,
OPEB history.
I will send that to the chair. Okay, other business. Mark, you had something?
Peter, two requests for the next meeting. Could we have on the agenda an update on 204 System Road?
Update from?
Town administrator. I know that some of the members have sent a letter. I'd like to see if we can get some feedback, an update on that.
Some members have sent a letter to whom?
Well, I think Karen had sent a letter about progress on stuff. I'd like to get an update on, I think when we did a site meeting, we were going to have some cost to bring up to code on the west side of the building, and I'd like to get some more information about, you know, other costs on that.
Okay,
At
so,
least a discussion about it.
okay, so one of the things, I'm just throwing this on the table, one of the things we talked about, I think before, was working that project through the capital outlay project, or process, whereby I think all the capital outlay requests for next year are in at this point in time. I haven't seen them. And if you remember, right, we had last month, Rich Larios was supposed to come in and see us, but he said, hey, it's too early, I don't have all the requests. So I think a good way to get into that topic, quite frankly, is for our next meeting, if I invite Rich to come in and tell us specifically on Cistern Road where he is with whatever articles or whatever, you know, proposed projects specifically associated with Cistern Road. Then allows us, once those are identified, to start digging in and saying, okay, where is the backup for this? You know, where'd that number come from? What are you doing? That kind of thing, you know? Because what I'm gonna imagine is with this list of special town meeting warrants, that the town administrator probably isn't gonna get too far in the next 3 weeks when we meet again, something like that. So if you don't mind, I'll make that request to Rich and let's see if that works. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, all right, so I'll invite Rich in. Go ahead.
And this is just a small matter. I spoke at the last selectmen's meeting, and I identified myself as Mark Kelleher of West Harwich. But in the newspaper, it said, Mark Kelleher, a member of the Finance Committee, and I just wanted to actually ask for guidance from the board, fellow members here. When I bring up things in front of the selectmen's meeting, is it enough to just say Mark Kelleher, West Harwich? I'm just speaking about things as a resident and taxpayer? Or do I have to say, Mark Kelleher, I'm not speaking for the finance committee? I
Okay,
just
so
want
what
clarification.
my suggestion from previous experience in that situation is to say, yes, I'm Mark Keller from West Harwich. I want you to know I am a member of the finance committee, but tonight I'm here before you as an individual citizen, I'm not speaking on behalf of the finance committee. That just puts it to bed, right? Now, if they don't quote you properly in the newspaper, we have to get after Billy Galvin to straighten it out or something, but I mean.
He's been doing it for 50 years. He's
No,
still messes.
but, people do make editorial mistakes, so they don't hear everything, that kind of thing. But if you make it clear that you're speaking as an individual, not as a member of the finance committee. It's the same thing with, when I was talking tonight about communication with the town administrator and people, if individuals start dealing with other individuals, then it's like, well, yeah, I know he's a finance committee member, but is he talking to me as a finance committee member, or is he talking to me as a citizen from West Harwich? I mean, it gets very confusing for, the other side, so.
And that the newspaper's gonna make that inference. They're quite naturally are gonna put that together, so putting it aside right up front,
I'm speaking for myself, not as a member of
the finance committee has not taken this up. They've not directed me to come here,
However,
which is different than standing up and saying, I'm here at the request of the finance committee to tell you this.
However, if there's something that the finance committee should know, or some action you would like to have them contemplate, as a finance committee member, you're welcome to bring it to us. And I don't even know what that might be, but I'm just saying, you don't want to limit your thought process and your actions based on either an individual or a finance committee member. It's just recognizing when it's appropriate to say, I'm a finance committee member, or, an individual citizen. So, okay? Anything
One-
else? Yep.
Just one of the benefits that I have as we start going into the 2024 budget, something that I haven't had for a few years now, is that will be talking about a budget where I will not be an employee of the town. I will be retired by then. I'll be retired later this year. So as we go into that budget session, I won't have that just situation or uniqueness where I have to say, I'm a member of that, I have to step out of the room, and this and that and the other thing, so.
I thought you were
It-
applying
it
for the
just-
town engineer job.
I could do that. It just makes me a regular citizen. As a member of the finance committee, you don't lose any of the rights and privileges you have as a citizen, certainly, but you have to be clear about identifying, I guess.
It's about undue influence. I mean, people can take things the wrong way. All right, anything else? All right, let's get through Labor Day and we'll come back, huh?
8 o'clock, we're
Thank
adjourned.
you for your hard work tonight. I appreciate it. Getting through those articles is important. Obviously, we're going to get to revisit them once the wording and the funding sources and the dollars are clarified, and we'll get to vote our support or non-support, et cetera.
We
So,
have to vote. Meeting-
what's that?
Do we have to vote? Meeting closed?
We have to
No,
move to
he can
adjourn.
call it, he can call
You
it.
can call it.
Yeah, I'm calling the meeting. Meeting is adjourned. How's that?
If we could end the tape.
We're adjourned.
We're adjourned, time to go home.